All right, hello and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. First of all, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Darug people as the traditional owners of the land on which I'm hosting this meeting today, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Today's webinar is about the case for founder-led marketing and how deep tech founders can turn their expertise into commercial momentum. My name is Leah Lucas. I am the Program Manager for CSIRO's Linfield Collaboration Hub. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Hub is an incubator located in CSIRO's Linfield campus in Sydney. And for around 10 years now, we've been supporting early stage startups and SMEs to prototype and build deep tech physical products and devices. We are backed by New South Wales Government through the Boosting Business Innovation Program. Their support has meant we've been able to provide hands-on program support such as accelerator programs, webinars like this, and workshops, as well as access to physical labs, offices, workshops and makerspaces for startups and SMEs at our Linfield campus. Startups who reside here also gain access to CSIRO's scientific expertise, networks and equipment. Now, it is my great pleasure to welcome Gavin Heaton, co-founder and co-CEO of Disruptors Co., who will be sharing some of his expert knowledge with you all today. I'd also like to note that today's session is being recorded. The recording and the copy of the slides will be available within a few days of this session and will be sent to all registrations registries who have given their details. We have the chat and the Q&A functions open. We will have time at the end to answer all of your questions. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Gavin. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Leah. And hello, everyone. Welcome. We've got a pretty jam-packed session for you this lunchtime, and it'll take us up to about the full hour, I'm guessing. But what we're going to look at, first of all, is what founder-led marketing actually is and some of the traps that people fall into. Then we're going to do some look at what this means in practice. So we'll investigate 2 or 3 people who are already doing this work. Then we'll give you a chance to build out your own founder-led marketing and so on. And then we'll review some of those items, some of your thinking with the rest of the people on the call, and maybe even set a bit of a plan for the next 20 or 30 days. Just take a moment to let a few people in because I think, Leah, we've got a few folks in the lobby that haven't been able to get in as yet. If you could just check and make sure that's all okay.
No worries.
So let's look at what founder-led marketing actually is. And often people get it confused with the idea of personal branding. And no doubt you've all heard of the importance of a personal brand. You've also got an understanding of what branding is. So what is corporate branding and how does that play a part in this process? And then influencer marketing. There are plenty of people out there who are influencers. There are people who are corporate influencers. They are technology influencers. They are fashion influencers. And how does influencer marketing also feed into this? So what we find in general is that founder-led marketing borrows a bit from all of these areas. Personal branding is really about that equity that you build as an individual. What that means is that if you leave a company, the brand goes with you. And that's a really great model. If you're a consultant or you're thinking about becoming a consultant or a freelancer at some stage, if you are a public speaker or a public intellectual, that personal branding is really powerful. But it doesn't necessarily work in the same way for a founder trying to build some scale into their business, their research, or their ideas. What you can use from that, though, is that sense of what is your voice? So how do you sound? How do you present in public? How do you show up? What is the authentic narrative that you have around yourself? And what is your domain expertise? So what do you know really deeply? And what can you showcase to the world at large? On the corporate branding side of things, we know that corporate branding builds equity in people's minds for the company itself. That's much more scalable, it's transferable, it's durable, but it does require a bit more team focus and foundation. So you need a marketing team, you need a budget. It's a big one. And often if you are a researcher or an early stage founder and you are pre-Series A, you may not find it being the best way for you to communicate with your audience and with your stakeholders. It may be too impersonal. So you can borrow some of that aspects around commercial intent, the ability to scale and focus on scale, and then the company equity. So starting to think not just about your own branding, but the branding as an asset that sits separate from yourself. And then over at influencer marketing is really interesting because you'll find that influencers have to stay current in a very different way. And they do that by creating lots of content. And we call this content marketing. So whereas corporate branding and corporate marketing, you have a budget, which means you have access to an ad spend budget. You may have some assets that are already being built for you. You might have content and teams building white papers and webinars and all sorts of things for you. As an influencer, you don't really have that team behind you in quite the same way. Obviously, if you are a successful influencer marketer, you might have a team that's working for you, but generally the focus there is on entertainment and engagement rather than deep diving into expertise. What you can learn from this, though, is a couple of really important things when it comes to founder-led marketing, and that is consistency, community, and platform distribution. So consistency means making sure that you're publishing on a regular basis, that you're building forward your presence in a systemic way, that you're building community around what it is that you do and know. So that's also really super important for founders. And then that platform distribution. So that means really understanding which channels work for you. So it may well be in the early stages that maybe something like X or Twitter works really well for you. It may mean that when you start to scale your business, you need to start to shift into, say, LinkedIn and build a researcher or founder community around your research or your science that you're working on or your project in a different space. And you do that intentionally at the right time when you understand who your audiences are and how your personal branding meets corporate branding meets influencer marketing as a founder. As I'm going through any of this, if this triggers a question for you, or if you get really interested in understanding what this might mean for you, drop a question into the chat window at any time, and I'll come back to it towards the end. So the way that I see founder-led marketing is that it's using your own voice, your story, and your domain expertise as the primary driver of your company's commercial presence. And notice I've said here commercial presence. So we don't necessarily need you to showcase your science or your research. We need you to showcase the expertise you have around translating that research into commercial value. And that is where it becomes another interesting challenge. But when you start to think about the way that you speak, the way that you tell your story, and the way you showcase that expertise in a way that makes sense to a commercial audience, then you're starting to get the hang of where we're going with founder-led marketing. So why do we use founder-led marketing? Well, I like to think that it's because when you're very early stage in your founder's journey, or you're heading from research into translation in a much more systemic and full-time way, you, as the founder, are the signal. And that signal goes directly to people like investors, funders, and customers who are looking to evaluate either the science, the research, the commercial viability of your products, and they're trying to figure out what is going to work and whether it works for them as an investor, them as a funder, them as a customer, or a partner, of course. So your credibility is on the line, and your founder credibility consistently expressed in public will become a commercial asset for your business as it starts to scale as well. So it won't just become you as a personal brand, it will be you as a founder doing this big project. Excuse me. So what does it do? It does a few things. So it builds credibility signal for your investors. It builds trust for your early customers. And when you're starting to think about growing your business, growing your team, it becomes a really powerful way to attract the talent that you need before you can afford a brand building exercise. So it can be really super useful to do that. So why does this matter? So pre-Series A, we know that about 73% of angel investors say the founding team is the single most important investment criteria. So what does that mean? It means that they're not really looking at your research. They're not looking at your science because you know what? You're experts. This is what you know. This is your domain of area of expertise, and you're kind of expected to be a leader in that field. So while you're showcasing that detail on your product side, make sure that you're turning it into a story that is about you. And at before you start to get that big funding boost, that's boost at Series A, really your business is unproven. So you don't really or may not necessarily have the product market fit that you're looking for. You may not have the revenue scalability that you're hoping for. But what we do know is that founders that come out of research and science have a higher level of success than most normal startup founders. Because part of that is your real judgment, your real network, your real expertise, and an ability to execute your vision. So founder-led marketing makes that really public. The other thing about founder-led marketing is it's really super capital efficient. And what that means is that you don't have a budget, you have a very small budget. So you're relying on you spending time doing this job. That's a trade-off, but it's something that is really worth your time and investment. And if you're going to put time and investment into something, you want to do it in the most effective and powerful way you can. Nice thing about it is that it compounds. So every time you post something, whether it's on whatever platform it happens to be, whenever you produce an article, a white paper, a video, a public talk, or produce a webinar, anyone who sees that is going to get a little dopamine rush and go, that's that person. They're going to recognize you and say, that's that person that I've been thinking about. If you do this consistently over a period of time, say 6 months, then what you're going to find is that over 6 months, doing this alone, maybe just doing one article published per month, in 6 months, you'll publish 6. If you don't do this, for example, a competitor may be in the same sort of space, but not doing any of this sort of founder-led marketing. If they're not publishing, they're not going to be seen in the same way. So you'll have produced 6, will have produced 0. If you do this once a week, then you're going to have produced 26 items, and they'll have produced 0. So just even the small numbers that we're talking about here all add up. So just imagine when you start to look at frequency, different channels, and so on, it starts to become quite a powerful conversation that you can take place. Most importantly, though, I think it's important to us to recognize the fact that when you're dealing with business-to-business transactions and conversations, if you are in that space where you are looking for partners or you're looking for go-to-market growth that allows you to leverage your research and your commercial capability into a new market, and a partner already has that, you need to have a deal. You need to make sure that you're working together. And what we do know is that in order for you to get that kind of deal in place, it takes over 50 types of different touch points before you get that deal signed up. And that means that you need to think through founder-led marketing so that you can get the networks and the content to do the work for you. So what does this actually look like? Generally, what we see with founders is that there's a natural arc, and there's 3 pretty distinct phases that allow you to sort of see how you can transition this. You can see down the bottom here, you are at the bottom left. You are here at very early stages of founder voice. This is where you are the signal. So every time you post something, every talk that you have, every conversation that you have is going to be designed to build investment, credibility, and early customer trust. Generally, that means you've got a team of between 1 and 5 people. You as the founder are the brand, and you'll be working on that founder brand as you're going from pre-seed through to Series A. Once you get to Series A, you start to click into what we call the team voice. And that second phase is where co-founders and early hires start to build presence around your expertise and your company's thinking. That means that you start to work as a team, and your co-founders and your early team members will start to contribute to that founder voice. So you do need to have a bit of coordination happening there, multiple voices, one story, and that's in that 5 to 20 sort of size team. And then once you start to find that you're starting to take off and you're getting a bit of funding, then brand and marketing take the wheel, founder presence becomes more selective. You may find that you're going to become the chief product officer. We've seen that with people like Bill Gates, for example, who is the chief product officer of Microsoft now, rather than the CEO. You can see these transitions start to take place, and it allows for a diversity of voices because also your impact of your startup or your scale up is starting to look at a broader range of impacts. It won't be just around a particular product. It'll be about longer term value that's being created. That means you need a bit of extra effort, and that's where your marketing team starts to run that engine that you've built. So there are these three particular stages, and ideally you'll be able to strategically move from one to the other, but it does take a bit of focus. But we're going to be starting with this founder voice here in phase one. So what actually happens in reality? Thought I'd share with you a few little lessons that I've been testing out myself here on TikTok. And TikTok's a really interesting channel because what I mostly talk about is marketing and growth strategies and innovation. And that becomes a really challenging area for something like TikTok because it's very commercial. So the trick is to try and find things that have traction in different spaces. So you can see I've got maybe 600 views around that in average across these more recent posts. Some of my older posts on marketing and innovation techniques actually have a few thousand views. But what is interesting about it is the difference between building longer term connections and touch points and doing sort of more noisy conversations. But one of the key parts for this, and one of the key lessons for me, is a shift from writing about things to talking about things. And when you do that, it changes the reframe and reframes the way that you speak about yourself and about your business in public. You'll also notice in here, there's a couple of coffee elements. And the reason I have them is not, well, partly is because I really like coffee, but secondly, the most, I guess, the intriguing part of this is that we're trying to find emotional inputs that allow my audience to touch base with a sense of familiarity. So if I can speak to coffee and frame it up as an important part of being creative or being innovative or coming up with new ideas, then it starts to feed into my founder brand as well. And it's taken me a little bit of time to figure that one out because I didn't do this work when I first started. So what we're hoping to do is give you a few tips and tricks here to help you figure out what your founder brand might be and then take that up a notch. But before we can share, before we can sort of look at this, we want to think about how the different channels work together to generate what you're looking for. And this was one of the, I guess, the interesting lessons that I've learned with founder-led marketing over a period of time, is that understanding your audience and what they do in one channel doesn't mean it works the same way in another channel. So it's a very different. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm taking my TikTok content and I'm seeing plays that are being consumed very nicely over there on a regular basis. But again, they're not large numbers. But what I'm able to do is I'm able to take that video and I'm able to cross-post that into LinkedIn. What that then allows LinkedIn to do is to tap into its own interests and the audience that I'm connected to over on LinkedIn, connect into their interests. And that cross-posting gives a different style of engagement. Over on TikTok, I'm getting plays. Over on LinkedIn, I'm getting views that then move over into profile views. So it's the LinkedIn, the TikTok, incidentally, is doing the job of creating the founder brand over on LinkedIn, even though it's not native. So understanding the credibility signals, speaking to the content and using that sort of TikTok method as a way of engaging translates quite nicely over into LinkedIn. And to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that that is taking place because I'm seeing much more profile view and I'm seeing much more content views over on LinkedIn than I'm seeing on TikTok. And that's kind of fun. But it gives you a bit of a sense of understanding what content works and how it relates to audience and channel. What I'm finding is that I don't have overlapping audiences. So the people who are in my LinkedIn are very different from people who are on TikTok and who are also very different from people who are on my X or Twitter. And understanding those different low overlaps gives me a benefit in each of those channels. So it means I produce content once, but I get 3 times the value of that one piece of content by cross-posting. And that's just the simple part of content strategy, cross-posting. When you start to lift it up a little bit and do differences in terms of cut downs, little snippets, little carousels, and all those sorts of different types of content marketing you can do, then you get uplifts on each of those as well. But what we do know is that organic social is a really powerful way to build that authority of your profile in a public way. But it does take time, and it does take some effort, and it does take some planning. And some of these tools that we're going to talk about today, some of the examples we'll have a bit later, will show you how to do these things. Now I'd like to also share with you, and I don't know if you know this chap from LinkedIn, but his name's Adam Robinson, and he's been building in public for quite some time. And he says things like, the days of faceless business to business marketing are over. And while his focus is on SaaS businesses, so software as a service, there's lots of things we can learn from the way that he does his work that allows us to apply it to founder-led marketing in a very strategic way. So what he knows is that people want to buy from people, not just companies. He uses the idea of stopping the scroll by introducing the good and the bad upfront. So you can see this video is really just talking about 30 million ARR, no paid ads, just LinkedIn. So he's looking to find the content market fit, not the product market fit. And what he's doing with his content is he's finding the market before he wants to sell to them. And while that's not necessarily the right or the model we would normally follow in a growth strategy, what he's finding is he's finding a unique voice is really helping him build trust and tap into other things, including the sound of his own voice. As you might expect, we're going to share these slides with you later, and you'll be able to watch this full clip on YouTube, but have a listen to this.
Anyone that follows me, if you ask them who Adam Robinson is, they're going to say something along the lines of he's bootstrapped 25 million. I've bootstrapped 3 million ARR 3 times. I've gone twice as fast with half the resources each time.
LinkedIn is your #1 customer acquisition channel.
So not only is it the #1 thing, it's actually the only thing. What we're talking about today, when I started posting on LinkedIn, it wasn't even a possibility. When you start...
So I only have a snippet there for you, which is a bit of a tease, but I would like you to think about that and then go and check out this video. It's a video with from Ahrefs, the podcast, and it's an interview with Adam. But he does actually go through some really cool things about the way that he has focused his efforts and found that content market fit. And I was particularly interested in the idea that constantly using video gets people used to your voice. And the reason that, in his thinking, the reason that radio works really well is you build trust when you hear the resonance of people's voices, in not just in terms of their text and what they're saying, but in terms of the nuance of their voice. And it builds a deep, trusted relationship inside your memory. And that voice and memory is super important for building that authority, that sense of engagement, and also a recognition for that particular founder and their business. So what did he do? Let's have a quick look here. He's got $0 to $5 million a year in annual revenue. It did it in 13 months, was pretty good, but he does start from a pretty powerful B2B sort of background. He started posting on LinkedIn before B2B was launched. So he already had another company called retention.com, but he was launching a new one called B2B, and it's a very interesting product. Don't think it's legal here in Australia, but you can check it out. And what it does is it tracks people's profiles as they go from LinkedIn to your website. And so then what it allows you to do is recognize that someone from LinkedIn is on your website and gives you a notice or an update, and allows you to then reach out to them, to send them an email and so on. So it's very interesting automation, shall we say. But what he was talking about, and what he has been talking about for probably about 2 years now, is that he's sharing the problems that he's facing as a business owner, not just as a product owner or someone who's building a product. So by the time he got to his launch day, he already had an audience who knew what he was doing. They were listening and engaged with what he was tackling. And they were making decisions about whether they would use his product before it launched. And then as it launched, he was able to hand over a nicely warmed up product and a workflow that allowed him to scale pretty quickly. What he also found was that the content became the marketing function. Now, you can see here at the top, it says $0 in paid marketing spend. Always take this with a grain of salt when you hear a startup founder telling you this, because these guys tried $100,000 a month in paid ads. So they, they have tried spending. They just found that the spending didn't work for them. What they did find, however, was that the content LinkedIn was delivering became the only way that they were spending their money. So they may not be spending on marketing, but they're spending on investments in building content through a marketing team. So it's an interesting angle, but you can only do this when your founder has really strong credibility in the marketplace. So if you are a founder and you're thinking about where your science, your research, your project is going to go, and you think it's going to be big, and you think you're going to need scale to make it have the impact you're looking for, then start thinking about this right now, because it takes not 1 month, not a few weeks. It takes consistent work over a period of time. And by that, I'm meaning 6+ months to do that. By the time RB2B got to 22 million in revenue, they only had 6 employees. So they're doing a pretty great job of scaling their technology and their business thinking into a market. And they're always looking for more. They're always looking for new ways to improve things. And if you follow Adam on LinkedIn, you'll get all of his updates, maybe too many of the updates. You might even get his newsletter. And if you go to his website, he will definitely be tracking you. So just be aware. So what can you learn and apply from Adam? First of all, systemic and singular wins. He is really narrowly focused on one thing, and that is business-to-business identity and one channel. As you saw, he said it's the only channel they now use. LinkedIn is their one channel, and it's one voice. So he is not sharing his platform with anyone else in his team, except more recently, maybe the last couple of months, he started to introduce a couple of other players like his head of sales. High frequency posting maintains feed relevance. So I don't know if you know this, but on LinkedIn, your feed disappears and it's reframed almost every moment, every time you visit the site. So just because you have posted 5 times doesn't mean that anyone in your network has seen it, because LinkedIn determines what goes into your feed. So when your colleagues log into LinkedIn, if you haven't been engaging with them recently, then you won't be appearing in their feed. So you need to maintain a high frequency of posting so that your feed is relevant to the audiences you want to reach. For Adam, everything circles back to business. He doesn't talk about the holidays he had or the other side hustles that he's looking at. He's really trying to build a body of work, not a moment in time, and that's what's really consolidated his positioning. There's another Australian company which I think is really interesting. It's called Minimus, and it's actually hubbed out of the Linfield Collaboration Hub, and they do a really interesting standalone heads-up display for runners and cyclists that started as an after-hours project in November back in 2022. And Joseph Guo, one of the founders, has a really great technique for working out loud. So just like Adam does, like I try to do, is to work out loud in public so that the things you're thinking, the work that you're working on, the challenges you're facing are allowing you to jump into an audience mindset. Because deep tech founders are working in contested domains often, it means that you're having to constantly take the leadership in a technical space. And when you're doing that, you attract a lot of attention. And sometimes that attention is not so pleasant. Interestingly, with the Minimus team, Joseph is great at taking on that public doubt and then reframe it. And he says, "This is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm doing it." And when you go back through his feed, you'll see some really cool things like we've got here, how it started back in November 2022 with, literally a sketch in what looks like Microsoft Paint. Then March 2026, so not that long, a couple of years later, they've got a full working prototype. And today on their website, you can see down the bottom there a pretty fine looking piece of heads-up display and sunglasses that are pretty fashion oriented or fashion forward, shall we say. Some of the things we can learn from Joseph and his team is that the deep technique that you're going to need to follow is to try and convert doubt into conviction in public. So don't take it out of the public channel. Have the conversations live, have them in the feeds, and allow those questions to play out. Because what is really cool is that as that happens, the investors that you're talking to will be checking out your LinkedIn profile. They'll be your stakeholders, your funders will be going, what's going on over there in that team? And when you've got that work being done in public, sometimes you're not going to have that same question in a funders meeting or in an investment meeting. You're going to already be able to reference it and say, hey, we've already covered that because it's already been done and it's been done in public. When you're doing this kind of work in public as well, it creates that halo effect for your technology direction. So when you start to say, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it, here's the trial we're taking, here's what we're finding with our prototyping, here's what we're doing with our mold conversions, here's what we're doing with our electronics, allows you to signal that you're taking a different path and you're producing that social proof as you go. And there's a great case study if you get a chance to take a look at Joseph's profile. There's a good case study that sort of builds into that as well. So you get a really good sense of what's going on with technology and different approaches you can take and the reasons why you're doing it. So what do all these have in common? So 4 key things. They think in public. So when you're thinking about your founder brand and your positioning, think about what you think in public. That way your posts aren't announcements. There's windows into the problems, into the ideas and your decision-making that you are doing in public. They're building it before they need it. In marketing, we often say, dig your hole before you need the water. That's the same sort of thing. You can't turn on founder-led marketing on day one. You kind of need to ramp it up. So build the audience first, and then once you've done that and you've built some trust and some authenticity and some authority in your audience space, you can then say, hey, who would like to prototype this? Who would like to become an early adopter? Who would like to pilot this? Can we find any partners out there? So you're already starting to lead the conversation you want early on. As you build credibility, what you're also going to find is that the following that you build in these different categories or different channels will start to accrue to the business as well. And the investors, when they're coming to look at you, they're going to be evaluating not just your founder profile, but they're going to be looking at the way that you built this business, the way that you're connecting your founders and your audiences and your co-founders and everything coming together so that it builds company credibility. So there's a bit of a transition that does need to take place there, but that's kind of what you're trying to build. We also know that consistency beats virality. So one thing might go off, you might get 1,000, 2,000, 1 million views, whatever it happens to be. But for these founders, and this is pretty much the case for everyone I know, except for influencer marketers who often will take one really random hit and turn it into something big. Generally, what we find is that consistency beats the viral moment. Because if you have one random piece that goes really, really strongly, it may not be repeatable in quite the same way that you need. And what you know is that research and commercialization takes quite some time. So getting a one-hit wonder is fantastic, but it doesn't actually give you the value that you need from investors, customers, partners, and long-term stakeholders. So moving from that awareness sense into warm conversations about how we can all collaborate and build an ecosystem and a community around our products and our research and our insights, that's the main game. So how do we build our foundations? I like to call this the founder lens. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just spend a couple of minutes thinking through these three questions. And if you've got a piece of paper, just jot down what you're known for. And by that, I want you to think about your expertise, your track record, the area that you are really strong in. It may be a particular area of research that you're interested in. It may be something else that you're known for that you're trying to translate into a new area. But think about what someone that you know well would say to you, say about you in one sentence. Then the second thing I want you to do is think about, what do you post about? So what are the themes? What are the questions? And what are the ideas that you naturally think about and makes you angry or curious or energized? So as we think back to Joseph's example, he gets really angry about people who are doubting where the technology is going. So he gets energized by that sort of contrarian views. So is there something that you get contrarian about? Is there something that you are really excited about? Is there something you are just, ravenously curious about? What is that? That's what you want to try and find. And then who are you reaching? So don't just think about the audience you're aiming for in terms of demographics, so how old they are, where they live, and so on, but think about the problems that those people have and why your thinking might help them. So if you're working in a particular area of science, for example, and you need to think about, and you've got an idea that you're trying to build, think about the idea that you've got that is helping someone do something with the support of your idea. So think about what problem that is that you're solving for them. So I'm just going to give you maybe just a couple of minutes to think this one through. And I know I've got 10 minutes up there, but I do want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. And in the meantime, you can drop any questions you have into the chat window for us. Next time, Leah, I think we need some thinking music.
What kind of thinking music do we need, Gavin?
I'm just thinking, chilled out beachside vibes.
Chilled.
I have just jotted down a few different ideas for myself from my previous life at IBM when I was working there. And one of the things that I was known for was getting things done. And I only found that out quite some time afterwards, after working there for a while. And it was a reflection on a colleague that I was working with. So it was a really good example of what would a peer say about you in one sentence. And then what did I post about? Well, it wasn't really about posting, and I probably wouldn't have been allowed to post in public at that stage. But what I was talking about a lot in the office was the technology that we were using and why it was really important and what it could do for people's jobs. And I would talk about how we use that technology to overcome or get around the barriers to getting either people to use the technology or a process that was stopping the, the creation of value. And then the third one was who was I reaching? And interestingly enough, I was often finding the other consultants who were frustrated at the barriers that they were facing. So I was inadvertently doing founder-led marketing within a company in the same sort of way that we're talking about now. Okay, that's a couple of minutes. Now what I'd like you to do is think about the second thing, which is which I call your signature advantage. And a signature advantage is not really about you. It's about what your audience gets. So a strong signature advantage answers, why should I follow this person? What will I learn or get from them? And what makes their perspective different? And if you think about your signature advantage, it's the line that goes under your LinkedIn profile that says, this is who you are and what you do. So if you are on LinkedIn, if you are on X, or you're on TikTok, your signature advantage is that line, which is your one line description of what it is and what you do. An example I've got here is, and this is about this particular subject that we're talking about today. So my example here is, I help deep tech founders understand why their hardest engineering decisions are actually their best marketing assets. So if we think about, that's really what this session is all about. Really what we're looking at is figuring out how the hard things that you do are your unique advantage that creates value immediately for people in a different way. And so for you in this case, it's about that marketing, creating that marketing asset. So have a go at trying coming up with that. I'm going to give you another 2 minutes or so there on that one. Okay, I'm going to give you 1 more minute. Keep going. Okay. Now, of course, there's lots of, once you've got your signature advantage and you have a good sense of who you are and what value you want to create, the next challenge is creating content. to create insights, and to figure out whether the content you're building is actually useful or not. So what I've created here is some simple AI prompts that you can use to kickstart your founder-led marketing. So you've already done your sense of who you are, you know what your project or your research is about, and you've got that one-line description for it. And then you know who you're trying to reach, so your audience or your investors or your customers and so on. So here on the first one, you can see to create some content, you can say, I am a research scientist building a startup that is focusing on new energy generation for regional communities. And then you might say, I want LinkedIn content that builds my credibility as a founder and attracts investors. Generate 8 content themes around 8 content ideas around these themes, and then give it 1, 2, or 3 themes, and then tell it to format each of these with a hook and a 3-line body and a call to action. And what that will allow you to do is you'll have given the prompt enough information about who you are, what your focus area is, what your research area is, and some themes that you're trying to tackle, and it will come up with some really interesting content for you. Again, generally with AI, always take it with a grain of salt. Always make sure you're doing some research into it and making sure that you're using your expertise and domain knowledge to test and validate whether the information is correct. But the AI is getting better and smarter, and the more you use it and the more that you give, more information you give it here, the better that content's going to be. So you might find that within a couple of hours after this webinar, that you're able to take some of these ideas and start turning them into LinkedIn posts or little paper ideas or longer form content or articles or whatever it happens to be. Then similarly over here, milestone or insight post. I'm a deep tech founder. I want to share the fact that I have just received a grant on LinkedIn. So I don't want you to announce the milestone, but share the thinking, decisions, and insight behind it so that readers understand how I think. Tell it who your target audience is, and then draft a 150-word post that leads with insight, not the announcement. So again, it's getting the idea out of your mind and out there into the network, into the internet ether. When you're talking about signature advantage, you might say, I really need to work on this, because the other thing is with most of this is it's iterative and you're going to refine this over time. So where you start now, you might come back to this in 3 months' time and say, we need to rework my signature advantage because I've learned a whole lot more about my audience and my science is heading in a different direction. And I've got some investors that are interested, but they're interested in version B rather than version A. So all this might have to change. So then build out a different signature advantage, and you can use a prompt for that. Similarly for a content audit. So after you've written a few things and you're starting to feel a bit more confident, you might grab all that content and say, here are these 5 recent posts that I've written. And for each of these, answer these questions. Does it build equity in me personally or in the company? What credibility signal does it send to my investors? And maybe rewrite suggest a rewrite that shifts more value to the company without losing my voice. So remember we talked about having to transition from your founder-led approach to a team-led approach. That's where the content audit can really start to kick in. And as I said before, we will make these available to you later. And now I'd like to get some feedback from you all and get you to share your signature advantage via the chat window. And you don't have to, but I'd really love to sort of see what you're thinking and what you've got there. And then when we see a couple of these signature advantages, we can provide in some feedback to those. Again, peer feedback is really super useful because the whole working in public and working out loud is a really vital way to get better at what you're doing in public. And it's not, while it's great that you can come up with these things in isolation by yourself, and here's what I've got, once you start to get real world feedback, you'll find it shapes the way that you think in a very different way, because you start to become aware of the voice of the customer, the voice of the investor, the voice of your stakeholders. And if you can start to take that on now, it's much easier when things get you'll build up that sort of, I guess, powerful muscle in terms of customer response and engagement in a much more meaningful way, and a more robust way as you go. So would anyone like to share their signature advantage in the chat window? No? No one? All right. So what about questions? Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask? Remember, of course, all this information and all these ideas work best in public. So if you've got any questions, now's is a safe space to ask any of those questions, and I can give you some feedback as we're going. So feel free to drop a question in either to the chat or into the Q&A. So as you come out of this session and then you reflect back on it later today, what I'd like you to think about is this sort of activity. Think about a 30-day plan for yourself. And as a founder, as a researcher, what do you want to do to grow that founder brand? So what does that mean? Think about, first of all, the platform. So whereabouts are you going to post? Where do you feel most confident? Taking my own perspective, again, most of my audience are on LinkedIn, but TikTok is where I can post and get content produced pretty quickly and then move it over. And that seems to be very useful for me. Similar, maybe that works for you, and that means sort of investigating the platforms a little bit more. That understanding who's on these platforms and what they're doing over there is something you only understand once you start to dive in. Then think about frequency. So how many times per week can you post? What sort of time should you post? Start conservatively, and remember that consistency is more important than the number of posts that you make. So maybe you can just do a Saturday review. Just look back on the week and say, here's what I've been looking at and seeing this Saturday over the last 7 days. You might do Mondays. How do we start our week? You might do Wednesdays. So hump day, let's have a look at what's going on and what I've been seeing out there. Then think about your content pillars, and by that we mean what are the content areas or themes that you're going to write about, and generally don't have more than 3 because it becomes too confusing for your audience, but write them down here, and then set a measurable goal for 30 days. So what happens at the end of 30 days? What are you hoping to see come out of this? Because that then also feeds back into all this. So you might think, what I would like to do is I'd like to have a customer conversation with one customer from LinkedIn. And that means that a lot of your content is going to focus into that space. So hopefully that becomes a useful framework for you. I do have a question from Leah. So she says, what would you suggest for a solo founder who is new to online marketing and is still learning which platforms would work for their area of expertise? Do you find some platforms are better than others? And the answer is yes. Yes, they are. Generally, you'll find that for consumer audiences, places like TikTok and Twitter and Threads and Facebook are in the right zone. When you think about business audiences, they're pretty much on LinkedIn, but you do find a little bit of crossover with Facebook, and you do find a little bit of crossover with Threads. If you are in technology and science, I hate to say it, but you're going to have to look at X. And this is what we're finding is that while it was not a strong place for quite some time, for probably about last 18 months, what we've found is the last 3 to 6 months is that the audiences that are doing technology or involved in science-related content are really posting strongly on Twitter, and they're finding really good audiences there. And I think it's largely because there are existing strong networks already in place across Twitter with some of the tooling features and some of the networking features that are built into the platform. So if you are in that sort of space, that's where you might find some great crossover and great opportunity. Try and do one channel at a time. It can become confusing if you're trying to do 1, 2, or 3 all at the same time, but try and do one platform at a time, choose the platform, come up with some frequency, come up with some content, set yourself a 30-day goal and see what works, and then review it at the end of the 30 days and then adjust that platform, frequency, content, and so on. And the more you do that, the better it's going to be. Hopefully that answers your question, Leah. So there's 3 things to take away. First of all, founder-led is not personal branding. So it does build commercial equity in your business, not just in you. The aim is that your destination is the company's credibility, not your own personal, because you've already got that personal credibility. You need to just grow it and twist it and shift it. Remember also that your credibility is already an asset. So you don't need to build that from scratch. You need to make it visible consistently in public before you need it to do some heavy lifting for you. So build on your credibility. Just know what you're already good at. Lean back into that and say, this is what I'm going to talk about. Find that spark and that passion, that interest. And like I said before, start simple, stay consistent. One platform, 1 or 2 posts a week. Think out loud. Remember that compounding happens not in days, although we'd like it to go really fast, that it's going to take months to do. So get started now, and in a few months, you'll have a way of cracking on. Okay, any last minute questions? Otherwise, I will hand back to Leah to close out. But thank you for joining us, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And hopefully next time we'll get some more open air public conversations going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gavin. I already learned so much from that session about, the way that platforms are behaving at the moment too. Having that kind of current intel is really helpful. Thank you so much. As a kind of parting piece of information, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, this recording and these slides will be available to everyone after the webinar has concluded. And yeah, if anyone is interested in learning more about CSIRO, the Linfield Collaboration Hub, or Disruptors Co and the important work that they're doing, please ping us. We're happy to take any kind of questions via email. Humanitix had all of our contact details in there. So thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye for now.